Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar today. This webinar is a presentation of Clean Energy Group's Resilient Power Project, and our topic today is how-to resources for building energy resilient communities. And on the webinar today we have 3 Clean Energy Group staff members. Before I pass this over to our speakers today, I'd like to go over a few quick housekeeping notes. All of our participants today are in listen-only mode. You have 2 options to join the audio portion of our webinar. You can call in using your telephone, or you can use your computer mic and speakers. And there's some instructions on your screen for how to format your webinar console for those options. A very important note, please submit your questions as you think of them at any time throughout the webinar by typing them into the question box on your webinar console and hitting send. We will be having a Q&A with our audience following our presentations, and we will get to as many questions as we can. And finally, this webinar is being recorded. You'll find a recording of this webinar as well as all of our previous Resilient Power webinars online on our website at resilient-power.org. And so our speakers today are 3 Clean Energy Group staff members. First up, we're going to be hearing from Seth Mullendore. Seth is a project manager for Clean Energy Group, and in this capacity he serves as manager, analyst, and technical advisor for power systems, solar PV applications, and battery storage projects. Seth works with policymakers and project developers on outreach and coordination of energy storage project development, and he provides research and reporting of energy storage technologies, policies, and supporting market structures. And after that, we will be hearing from Todd Olinsky-Paul. Todd is a project director for Clean Energy Group and our partner organization, the Clean Energy States Alliance. Todd directs the Energy Storage and Technology Advancement Partnership, also known as STAP. STAP is a federal state funding and information sharing project that aims to accelerate the deployment of electrical energy storage technologies in the U.S. Todd also works on resilient power in the areas of solar+storage, fuel cells, and CHP for critical infrastructure energy resiliency. And last but not least, we will be hearing from Rob Sanders. Rob is a Senior Finance Director for Clean Energy Group, and Rob provides analysis and designs and promotes finance strategies to engage multifamily affordable housing developers, municipalities, and other project developers in community resilient power. Rob has over 25 years of experience in community development and energy-related commercial finance. So with that, I'd like to pass it over to our first speaker, Seth Mullendore.
Thanks, Sam, and thanks everybody for joining us today. First of all, Clean Energy Group is a national nonprofit working on innovation in finance, technology, and policy for clean energy technologies. We also have a sister organization that we manage, the Clean Energy States Alliance, which is an association of state clean energy fund managers. The Resilient Power Project, which is what brings us here today, is completely foundation supported by JPB Foundation, Kresge, CERDNA, Cummings, and Barr Foundation. The Resilient Power Project has been in operation for a couple of years now, and the main crux of the project is to increase public and private investment in clean, resilient power systems. So this is mainly solar PV with battery storage. And we do this by engaging officials at the state level, the city level, and with developers who are actually developing resilient power projects on the ground. The project has a specific focus on bringing these technologies to the populations that need them most, such as low income and other vulnerable populations like disabled or senior housing, and also the critical facilities that help keep their communities going in an emergency, such as emergency shelters, police and fire stations, and things like that. We also advocate for energy storage and solar and storage policies on the state and federal level, and we do provide some technical assistance through a fund that can help support the pre-development costs of certain projects, the initial technical and financial feasibility to get a project going. So today we're going to be talking about our new Resilient Power Project website, which we're all very excited about. So here's a list of some of the things we're going to be going over today. I'm not going to get into this too much because we're just going to pretty much jump right into the website. So let's get that going. All right, so here is our new project website. It's much more streamlined and has a lot more functionality than our old website. Just to give you a little bit of background in the beginning, I want to tell you a little bit about what the Resilient Power Project has been up to over the past couple of years. Mainly, the focus of the project has been getting projects done. So through our Technical Assistance Fund, we've supported a number of projects. I believe we have around 16 projects right now that are in our different stages of development. Rob will go over some of those projects in more detail later on in the webinar today. We've also been working with a lot of states on state-level programs, and Todd will get into that with you more later on during his presentation. One of the other things that we've been up to a lot over the past year is writing some reports. We've been trying to get information out there about solar and storage technologies and how clean energy technologies can help support resilient populations. So on our publications screen, you'll find a list of all of our publications in the order that they came out. The one that we have featured here is from late last year. It's called Resilience for Free. Again, Rob will talk a little bit more about this later, but basically it looks at resilient solar and storage in 3 different metropolitan areas and finds that the economics actually look good for these projects so that you can provide resiliency for affordable housing basically for free at no net cost over the lifetime of the project. We have a number of other reports that can be useful to different stakeholders. We have a look at energy storage markets, a look at what states should do, as well as what cities can do, and a number of other helpful publications. I'd also like to talk a bit about where we're headed in the coming year. So we're going to try to write less reports this year because we've gotten a lot of information out there, but we're going to be working with partners to get some more information to people that will be useful. One of the things we're looking at is how storage systems can be combined with net energy metering programs and how those policies can work out, as well as the changing climate for net energy metering across the country as states like Nevada and Hawaii have begun to change their net metering policies. We're also going to be looking closer at demand charges, which right now is pretty much just commercial customers face a demand charge. That's a per kilowatt charge on their systems. And storage can do a lot to help reduce those costs. We're also going to take a look at residential demand charges. This is something that utilities are more and more looking at as they're trying to propose rates that can help them recapture some of the revenue they've lost to efficiency measures and solar. Residential demand charges are increasingly being looked at by utilities. We also have a number of projects that we're working on with national labs. Todd will tell you more about the STAP project and the work that they're doing. We'll be working with the National Renewable Energy Lab as well this year on a project looking at optimization for commercial behind-the-meter solar and storage projects, looking at market analysis and how those systems can be optimized for best performance. We're also going to be working more in California this year. There's a bill out there called AB 693 that basically provides $1 billion in incentives for solar over the next 10 years through cap and trade funding. And we believe there's an opportunity there for storage as well. We're going to be working with a number of housing advocates in the area to look at an economic analysis of solar and storage and resilient solar and storage in California affordable housing and trying to create an incentive structure that allows those vulnerable populations to have the benefits of these advanced technologies. All right, so that's a little bit of an overview of what we've been doing and what we will be doing. Now I want to jump into some of the new features on the website. I already showed you we have publications that are available that we've written. And in addition, we also have a new frequently asked questions category. For those of you that are particularly new to the concept of resilient power or new to solar and storage or how the Resilient Power Project works, we have this new fact section. So feel free to look around there, and we try to answer questions that come up a lot when we're working on these projects. We also, as you know, have a number of webinars, and like the one today will be, we have a page that has all of our archived webinars. You can see some of the recent ones here. We had one recently just last week on financing solar and storage with federal tax credits, which was a great webinar. We had a really good attendance for that. A look at energy storage technologies, a number of issues. We also have a lot of webinars, and we'll go through those a little bit more at the end so you can see what we've got coming up. But we always have new webinars coming online and over a lot of different topics. Here's the one today. We've got some coming up on some of the New Jersey programs, fuel cells, lots of things going on. Again, I'll go through a list of that later on today, and you can always find it available on our website. All the webinars have the recording as well as the slides from presenters for that day. One interesting one that we're going to be having coming up too, maybe of interest to people, is a look at resiliency in San Francisco, which I think is going to be a really good webinar on how to develop a citywide solar and storage disaster plan for a city, and that's going to be coming up there in March 7th. So that's one to look out for. What we also have, and in addition to our publications, we also do a lot of blogging on the topic for a little shorter bits of information. So we have our blog archived on the website as well. So lots of stories come up here. We usually come out with a few each month, and I urge you to go and take a look at those. For those of you that like to keep up to date with what's going on with the Resilient Power Project, we also offer a couple of newsletters. One is basically our project newsletter. That's a monthly Resilient Power Project newsletter. So that comes out each month, lets you know what's going on across the country, as well as what's going on with the project itself, and some international news as well. And on the technology side, we have a weekly solar and storage news that basically highlights the top, 4, 5, 6 top energy storage, solar and storage news items of the week, and gives a brief synopsis of what those stories are and links to more information. So now I'd like to take a look at a few of the features just a little bit more closely that we've added to the website that we think are particularly useful for developing projects, resilient power projects. One of the things that we've added recently and updated is our solar and storage project checklist. What this is basically a checklist that people can go through when thinking about how to develop a new project. It's not an exhaustive list. It's just meant to be a high level. What should you think about when you're thinking about with utilities? What should you think about in designing your solar and storage system? Just a very simple items to check off to help somebody get more familiar with the process, or even to step you through the process as you're trying to design a solar and storage system. Another thing that we've added that we've been working on behind the scenes for quite some time is our project map. And this is a list of all the resilient power projects that we're aware of across the country. We try to be as exhaustive as possible, but we certainly don't know about all the projects that are out there. So if you know of any projects, you're working on any projects, please share them with us. We'd love to add them to the list, and we'd love to learn more about them. We have an online form where you can submit information to us to let us know about projects, or if you have any information about the projects that currently are listed on our map. So when you click on a specific project, you can get more information about the project, its product status, who the developers were, some of the funding, as well as what technologies are used in the project and what services it provides. All of these systems provide some form of resiliency for backup power and use primarily clean energy technologies. Usually that's solar and storage. Some of them also use other technologies, but they're primarily clean energy. Related to our project map, we also now have a page of featured installations. And these are installations that we have come across or we've been involved in that we feel like are particularly good examples of the kind of projects we're trying to promote through our Resilient Power project. One example here is the Stafford Hill Solar Farm, which is a microgrid in Rutland, Vermont. This is a great project. This happened through the STAP project that Todd is very involved in. And basically, it's a big solar and storage microgrid. It has 2.5 megawatts of solar and 4 megawatts of battery storage. And not only does it add value to the utility that owns it, Green Mountain Power, but in the event of a power outage, it provides resilient power for the Rutland High School, which acts as an emergency shelter for that community, which experiences frequent outages when they have severe weather there. So this is really all I think I have for an overview of the website. I'm going to pass it over now to Todd Olinsky-Paul to give you a little bit more information about what Clean Energy Group has been doing in the state level.
Okay, thank you very much, Seth. This is Todd Olinsky-Paul. I'm going to go over some of the programs and projects that we have that are specific to state efforts in resilient power. And then at that point, I'll turn it over to Rob, and he'll wrap up with information on financing. So let's see if I can, there we go. So I wanted to step back just a little bit and give you a little bit of information on how the Resilient Power Project got started. And basically, I mean, this is something we had been thinking and writing about for a while, but it really got catalyzed when Hurricane Sandy hit and devastated the Northeast back in October of 2012. And at that point, we had a number of states that came to us and said, you know, we could really use some help in figuring out how to fix it so that, you know, there's more resiliency, that critical facilities and services are protected so that when the next storm comes through, you know, first responders can gas up their vehicles, and you know, that cell phones are working and shelters are, you know, are powered and so forth. So from that, we started working with the northeastern states, and we basically were playing a convening and knowledge sharing role in the beginning and assisting with policy and program development in a number of states in the Northeast. We started doing more research and providing information and pulling in other partners such as national labs and getting foundation funding to support this. So this has really grown quite a bit in the years since 2012. The early results in the Northeast were remarkable, and this is really, you know, a tribute to the dedication and, you know, really the sincerity with which the state agencies really, you know, went after this issue and dedicated resources to it. So here's just a few of the programs, and this is the, you know, the major programs. Obviously, Connecticut, $50 million has now been allocated in a 3-year microgrid program. New Jersey has $9 million in energy storage specifically for resiliency, and then another $2 million Energy Resilience Bank, which is the first in the nation. Massachusetts has really come out with a strong program. They devoted $40 million to a community clean energy resiliency initiative, and another $10 million to an energy storage initiative, and there is currently a microgrids program being launched as well in Massachusetts, and a state energy storage roadmap being written. And then, of course, New York has its $40 million New York Prize Microgrids competition, which has, I believe, to date, funded 83 feasibility studies for municipalities all over the state of New York for microgrid feasibility. And so this represents some $340 million in new state public funds in the Northeast alone dedicated to resilient power. Of course, this is not limited to the Northeast, but I did want to take a moment to just look a little more in depth on one of these programs or two of these programs, because this is really kind of where this resilient power thing took off first, and so there's a lot of experience in the Northeast at this point. This map, it's a little hard to read some of the smaller print, but it shows you where communities have received clean, resilient power program grants in the state of Massachusetts. And there have been obviously a number of grants awarded. Those projects are now going to contract, and we have quite a in-depth role here because we are, well, first of all, through our partnership with Sandia National Laboratories, which I'll explain a little bit more later, we're providing technical assistance to a number of these projects, and then through a generous donation grant, I should say, from Barr Foundation, we are able to provide in-depth technical and engineering assistance to a large number of smaller projects in Massachusetts, just to make sure that these things not only are well designed and built, but really optimized to give the best, highest benefits to the communities, and also to get whatever kind of economic benefits they're capable of generating to those communities. I also, as I said, these are not these types of extreme weather events and climate-related events that result in outages not simply occurring in the Northeast. They're occurring all over the place, and we see these maps that NOAA puts out every year where they identify the billion-dollar weather and climate disasters. They don't even bother with the sub-billion-dollar ones. And as you can see, they're not only storms in the Northeast, but storms through the middle part of the country. There's flooding in the South. There's drought and wildfires in the West, and this is just, of course, climate. It doesn't include things like, earthquakes, which have become a major concern in the Pacific Northwest. So as we, become more and more aware of the real scope and challenge that these extreme weather events and other types of natural disasters pose, and as they become more frequent and more severe, the interest in resilient power is really spread across the country, and it's very, it's very gratifying to see that states in all parts of the country are now, looking to, sort of the early adopters in the Northeast and learning from their experience and applying some of these lessons learned to their own programs. I want to point out as well that, Seth mentioned this in passing. We obviously have a whole lot of publications available on our website. This is one that is of particular interest for states. It's called What States Should Do, A Guide to Resilient Power Programs and Policy. It summarizes all of those state programs I mentioned earlier and others as well. It really pulls out best practices and lessons learned from those programs. It talks about various policy and programmatic tools that states can use for resilient power, support and program development. It talks about the role of non-state entities, and really gives a lot of resources for states that may, state agencies that may be interested in looking into developing resilient power policy and programs. And that's, there's a link on your screen. Obviously, you could just go to our website and go to our library and find this and all our other reports. I did want to take a minute to talk about our STAP program, and then I'll pass this over to Rob. The resilient power work that we've discussed so far has been on the clean energy group side of our dual house, and so this is a little different. This is the Energy Storage Technology Advancement Partnership, which is conducted on the CISA side of our house. and is funded by U.S. Department of Energy through a grant with Sandia National Laboratories, and I should thank them both for supporting this program. And this really focuses on large-scale energy storage demonstration projects. But again, it focuses on states and joint federal-state action. And really, you know, our role here, our main role here, is to bring states to the table to partner with DOE and the national labs to get energy storage projects developed jointly. There have been quite a few states that we have brought to the table for this, and this shows a number of the locations where STAP is active, either supporting state policy and program development or supporting actual demonstration project deployment. There's two in red here that I wanted to focus on, Oregon and Vermont, only because they're good examples of how we've worked with states to get projects deployed that not only are good demonstrations for energy storage, but are also providing resiliency and resilient power benefits. So the one in Vermont, Seth mentioned earlier, is a Green Mountain Power project. It was funded through a joint solicitation. The Vermont Department of Public Service put out in collaboration with US DOE Office of Electricity, and that resulted in this 4 megawatt energy storage plus PV microgrid. I won't go into depth on that. Seth already talked about it a bit, but I also wanted to point out that we're doing much the same thing in Oregon. There was a joint solicitation there, which has resulted in an award for a 500 kilowatt energy storage and PV microgrid in Oregon, which will provide resilient power to 3 critical facilities: a water supply, a telecommunications facility, and a utility operation center. And that is in Eugene. And finally, I just wanted to mention that if anyone is interested in learning more about the STAP program, there is an STAP page. This is on the CISA side of our house, again, but you can get there by clicking through from the Clean Energy Group website. And there is an easy way to sign up for our listserv and review our webinars and so forth. So I think that's it for me, and I'll now turn the microphone over to Rob Sanders to talk about finance.
Great. Thanks a lot, Todd. I'm going to talk a little bit today about the economic case for solar plus storage, say a word about our Technical Assistance Fund, and highlight some of the financing tools that can be used for resilient power projects. Most people understand the value of solar PV pretty well. Obviously it offsets electricity consumption by providing self-generation. In many states, you can sell your solar RECs and make some revenue from that. There are incentives at the federal level. The investment tax credit and makers accelerated depreciation are significant incentives for solar PV. And then there are state and local incentives, including net metering revenue for your excess generation, at least for now. There seems to be increasing pressure on net metering policies in states presently because of issues regarding support for the grid, and some people raise equity issues as far as who's actually paying for the value of solar. Anyway, I think we'll see a trend towards lower net metering values over time. But I think when you think about battery storage, it's important to think about the special case of how storage provides value for a range of segments of the power system. All these segments enjoy benefits, whether it's utilities or grid operators or commercial consumers or residential consumers. And Some of those values are the improved power quality and reliability for the grid. Some include reduced utility bills and the generation of revenue for commercial and residential customers. And there's clearly the value of reliable backup power during severe weather and other outages. Another prime value of energy storage is in its ability to shave peak demand. By switching to battery power when electricity demand spikes, commercial customers can avoid costly demand charges, and increasingly you're seeing this happen. In addition to utility bill savings, energy storage systems can often take advantage of multiple revenue streams, and those include demand response programs in many localities and grid ancillary services payments, such as from frequency regulation. And I've listed some other ancillary services. These services can frequently be stacked depending on the specific market that the system is located in, and also the what the purpose of the energy storage system is going to be for the customer. So commercial customers have been quick to take advantage of these economic benefits. These commercial customers have been the early adopters in storage, and those include Walmart, UPS, Walgreens, and others who've installed solar+storage systems, mostly to reduce their utility bills. We believe the challenge now is to bend that technology trend for solar+storage systems to serve more public needs, such as affordable housing and other essential services in low-income communities. So to date, the Resilient Power Project has focused a lot of its activities on affordable housing and community facilities. We've been working to demonstrate the viability of clean energy and storage in multifamily affordable housing, in elderly and supportive housing, and have been assisting housing and solar+storage developers in all over the country, in New York City, in Chicago, in Washington, D.C., Newark, Austin, Connecticut, California, Arizona, all across the United States. We've also been working to demonstrate the feasibility of clean energy plus storage in critical community facilities, such as community shelters, police and fire stations, hospitals, municipal buildings, and wastewater treatment facilities. A good tool that we've been putting to work has been our Technical Assistance Fund, which provides small grants that pay for third-party technical services to determine a project's feasibility. That would be both its technical feasibility and its financial feasibility. To date, 16 projects are in some stage of evaluation and development. We expect to see 3 of these projects, all housing related, in operation by the end of 2016. In exchange for providing these small pre-development technical services grants, we require that deal and financing docs be shared with us so we can see how these projects have been put together. And we ask for some basic reporting over a 2-year period regarding project performance so we can compare performance against projection. So once the decision is made to pursue a resilient power project, how do you finance it? Well, there are lots of options depending on the entity that is developing the project and the kind of project it is. Bond financing is available, for instance, for nonprofit organizations who have portfolios of properties where they're considering solar and storage operation systems. And housing bonds are available, of course, for affordable housing, school construction bonds. And I think there's been a lot of thinking as multifamily affordable housing projects are being recapitalized as they come off their initial financing terms and they go back for additional low-income housing tax credits or other capital. There's increasing interest about including solar+storage as a resilience function as part of the capital budget for those projects. Third-party ownership can be financed with power purchase agreements or lease financing. There's financing available from clean energy financial institutions such as the state green banks. Todd mentioned the New Jersey Energy Resilience Bank. There are other dedicated clean energy financial institutions, of course, as well. And then credit enhancement has an essential role, I think, in attracting private capital to these new projects and reducing the cost of capital. But I think it's really important to keep in mind that financing is just one key public resource that's needed to scale resilient power for critical facilities. This is very early in an emerging market, and it's not sufficient just to come up with new financing tools. Investment really won't get traction in this emerging market without an adequate policy and regulatory framework, without sustained technical assistance, without data collection and analysis, and information sharing. And so it's this market building work, together with financing strategies that we plan to be focused on this coming year in particular. Okay, thank you. Now I'll hand it back to Seth.
Great, thanks Rob, and thanks Todd. We have a few questions that have come in, but I urge anyone else that has some questions. We've got a fair amount of time left here, so we'll dive right into get to answering some of these questions. First one I'm going to direct towards Todd. There's a question about, given the long supply lines for electricity and natural gas used in power plants, it seems that much of the local vulnerability could actually stem from disruptions hundreds or even thousands of miles away. Are states thinking along these lines, or are they mostly looking at very localized disruptions?
Yeah, I think, there isn't much that you can do to control, a problem, a vulnerability with that resides in a power line, hundreds of miles away if it's outside of your state. I think that the point, well, there's 2 points. The point of the Resilient Power Project, and I think this is picked up in a number of state programs, is to protect the critical facilities and services that are most crucial during a natural disaster. So, under ordinary circumstances, if there's an outage because a squirrel, got into a switching box somewhere, and there's not a disaster going on, no big deal. If there is a hurricane that is, threatening health and safety and destroying, property and so forth, and the power is out, that's when you're going to need to know that, your first responders and shelters and, communications facilities, water, supply and so forth is protected, and that's where you need the critical, resilient power to critical facilities. The other side of it is the grid modernization movement, which is just starting to pick up really in a few states, notably in New York and Massachusetts. And there's a couple other states that are sort of looking at this as well, and that is looking more at the electricity supply as a whole, how can we make the grid itself more resilient, not just critical facilities on a local level? And what does that require? Does it mean microgrids? Does it mean, smart grids? Does it mean advanced, remote monitoring, two-way flows of power? What does it mean? And that's really just at the beginning stages of being addressed. In the New York REV proceeding, in the Massachusetts grid mod, and then a couple other states, that Hawaii and a couple other states that are sort of starting to look at this. But that's a much harder lift. It really goes to the fact that our grid is old, was designed with one-way flows of power from centralized generators in mind, and was not designed to deal well or quickly with disruptions to that system. So, I think it's well worth looking at, but most of the state resiliency programs are really more focused on making sure that communities can figure out which are the critical facilities and then target solutions like solar and storage to protect those particular facilities so that there are islands of electricity supply within the, wherever the power is out, that there are islands of power that is still on, and that supports the entire community because it supports those critical services.
Great, and I'll just add to that not so much in the United States, but seeing in other countries, particularly Australia, they're looking at the communities that are at the edge of the grid, that have long feeder lines that have to be maintained to keep those communities electrified. They're starting to look at switching to mainly solar and storage microgrids as a less expensive alternative than maintaining and upgrading expensive hardware or expensive transmission lines in those projects. So it is something that they're looking at that level as well. I have another question that I think I'll just address quickly. Is there's a question about the maintenance requirements for storage and how toxic storage materials are. It depends on the battery, really. Something like an older model, a lead-acid battery as a backup, would need more maintenance requirements than more advanced lead-acid batteries, and certainly more, lithium-ion batteries and such. Today's advanced batteries don't take a lot of maintenance. It's just basically like any other technology component. There may be needs to, check for errors or do some minor, software or hardware adjustments from time to time. But the maintenance requirements are not excessive, certainly not day to day. As far as the toxicity, again, that depends on the technology. Both lead-acid and lithium-ion do contain hazardous materials. There are some batteries that are less so. There's a company called Aqueon that makes an aqueous battery that's basically has no hazardous materials. And flow batteries, which use liquid, less toxic liquids for the storage capacity are another option that don't have some of the fire safety concerns that some lithium-ion batteries do have. Todd, do you add anything to add to that?
Yeah, just quickly, this happens every time there's a new technology. I mean, there are people out there that are protesting, solar PV installations as being health hazards. And it's hard to sometimes imagine, what a solar panel could be doing to cause people concern. But every time there's a new technology, that there's a process that communities go through in learning about the technology and assuring themselves that it's safe or can be made safe, and figuring out what the various siting, permitting, maintenance, precautions need to be taken. And this is something we went through with wind energy, and we're going through it now with storage. And there's nothing particularly dangerous or frightening about storage any more than it's dangerous or frightening to be driving around in a car with a tank full of gasoline, which is, as everyone knows, explosive. So, and yet we do it all the time, and for the most part, it's fine. I think that there are efforts underway right now in the national labs and elsewhere to come up with some best practices and model ordinances for use in siting, various types of batteries. And what do you need to do to make sure that your fire safety professionals, are prepared? What do you need to do in terms of siting to make sure that you have proper safeguards? Most of the batteries that are lithium-ion batteries are, in containers. They are provided with their own fire suppression equipment. It's all automated. If anything were to overheat within that container, there's an automatic chemical, foam or whatever that particular system is. There are several different systems out there. And, I think people just need to understand that, it is a new technology at this scale. We've been using batteries in our flashlights for a long time, and that's not a problem. But at this scale, yeah, there's going to be reasonable precautions to take.
All right, sure. So then I'm going to direct this one to Rob. Where did the money for the Technical Assistance Fund come from, and is there still any money available?
Right. We're fortunate to have generous funding from a number of national foundations that supports the Resilient Power Project work, including the funding of the Technical Assistance Fund. I should just say that as people know, the Resilient Power Project and Clean Energy Group do provide this technical assistance both through our time without any financial interest in any of the projects. Of course, this is an effort to try to accelerate the adoption of these technologies, and we pay for third-party services with the Technical Assistance Fund. We have pretty much worked through our initial allocation of funding. We have some money left. The amount of money per project is in that $5,000-$10,000 range, to pay for the scoping and feasibility analysis for building-specific solar plus storage or other clean energy plus storage projects. But we expect more money will be forthcoming, and so we are very much interested in talking to people who have projects that they're considering, and we can provide assistance regardless of whether we place a grant to pay for third-party technical services for actually doing the work up on a specific project. We can provide high level of support for somebody who's trying to think through a project.
Great. That's kind of related to the next question. There's a question about a minimum scale that you think is doable, a number of units or capacity. I would say that there really isn't an ideal number of units or size of a building, although we have found that larger buildings tend to have a better case. On one hand, they may have more room for solar, and they certainly generally have more room to house energy storage, although it's not a big space. It doesn't take up a big amount of space, energy storage. It's still in a bigger building, you tend to have more room. Another thing is that bigger buildings will have, in affordable housing, a larger building will have a larger common area load, which is the type of load that incurs demand charges, which is one of the biggest economic incentives for adding storage to a project. So if you have a larger common area load, there's more potential for savings there through demand charge management. Also, even providing grid services, it tends to be that when you can scale the battery larger, some of the other associated costs don't scale with it. So larger projects tend to be a bit more economical than smaller projects. But again, it really depends a lot on what the project is doing and what your intentions are. Rob, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's right. That's all accurate.
The only thing I would add, Seth, is that, I apologize for that, the interruption. If we look at ancillary services that can be provided by storage, and these are services to the grid and the grid operators, such as frequency regulation and response and VAR support and so forth, there are threshold size requirements for some of those services, and that will depend on where you're located in, if you're in an ISO or an RTO, which one you're in. So, for example, for frequency regulation, I believe the threshold in PJM is 100 kilowatts, but it's higher in some other neighboring ISOs. So that is one aspect that you might want to consider if you're planning to build a project and sell ancillary services, that you need to make sure that you're going to be able to meet those minimum capacity requirements to enter the market, or you need to make sure that you can be aggregated along with other projects by an aggregator to sell those services.
Great. So here's a question that I'll say an answer to, but you guys jump in if you have more to add. It's asking how exactly we were making contact with the municipalities about implementing energy resiliency at shelters, et cetera. A lot of it is through webinars like this that we get information out there, and then we hear back from municipalities that are interested in doing these projects. Also, through getting our reports out there, and we do some direct outreach to communities that we know have an interest in resiliency or interest in clean energy, and seeming like likely candidates for places that would be interested in these projects. Rob, Todd, do you guys have anything to add to that?
I think we do a lot of outreach. We do presentations and conferences that the American Planning Association hosts, that HUD hosts for its CDBG disaster recovery recipients, that the 2030 districts does for its member cities. So we're actively looking for municipalities who are interested in trying to understand how to make a resilient energy project work for their critical loads.
Great. So this is going to be for you again, Rob, I think. Are there any examples of communities successfully combining school construction, like the building of a new gym, that could also serve as an emergency shelter? I believe this is probably talking about financing side of things, if you can incorporate that into the cost.
For new construction, I've not seen it yet, but there are a lot of examples of retrofits to school facilities for emergency shelters, and there's one going on right now in New York City with CUNY's Queens College, and they're also in Florida. There are over 100 instances of using solar+storage for emergency facilities in schools that have been done in Florida over the last several years.
Yeah, those are great examples. So here's one that, I don't know, Todd, maybe you can answer this. It's how do you measure the project performance, and can you share some real-life examples of performance measurement? I know through the Resilient Power Project that the projects we're working with are still in the development phase, so we don't have any performance data on those yet, but some of the stuff you've worked with through STAP does have some performance, isn't that right?
Yeah, we're actually starting to collect data on some of these projects, and I guess it depends on what exactly you mean by performance and what the project is, what the storage component or the solar and storage component of a project is meant to do. As far as the resilience benefits, obviously. Performance would mean, if there's an outage, that the system effectively islands and supports the critical load that it's intended to support. Fortunately, we haven't yet, I'm not aware yet of any of the projects we've been involved with being called upon to do that. We've had a pretty mild winter here, which may be a big part of the reason for that. But the other aspects of project performance are typically monitored and tracked over a year at least post-commissioning. So that would mean that you're looking at and recording, how the battery is dispatched, for example. And that has a lot to do with optimizing these projects, which is something we're trying to do right now. We have a project in the works with NREL to gather data from behind-the-meter solar and storage projects and model and optimize these projects for different types of facilities in different regions, so that in the future, rather than experimenting, we'll have some actual guidelines on how to best design and how to best, dispatch these projects. I should say that optimization software is a really crucial part of the whole picture. There are companies out there that provide it. Some of the national labs provide it, and we talk about stacked values, and this has been kind of a byword in the storage industry for a while now. You need to be able to figure out how best to dispatch a battery in order to take best advantage of a number of different value streams that may be available, while minimizing wear and tear on the battery, because you want to maximize its life. So it's a fairly complex calculation. Should we be doing arbitrage, or should we be selling frequency regulation, or should we be taking advantage of time of use rates to buy and sell at different times of day, or should we be reducing our demand charges? And there's so many of these value streams that you really do have to understand pretty clearly what the best bang for your buck is. So I'll just say, we do try to make sure that, and this is a huge part of any project, is making sure that not only does the technology work, but that it pays off financially, because that's really the future for the industry. And if you're not able to collect money for resiliency, which we're not, because there's not a resiliency market yet, you need to have projects pay for themselves in other ways. And as you've shown through the Resiliency for Free report, Seth, they can. In many places they can.
So we're getting towards the end of the hour here. I'm going to have to jump off pretty soon, but I'll stick around for another question or two, and then I believe that Todd and Rob will have some time to answer your questions and continue answering for people that can stay on the line. There's a question of, do we have a page that details equipment used in installations with battery backup at commercial locations? Yes, if you go to our project installation map, this is just resilient power projects, so ones that offer resiliency, but there are a number of commercial locations in there. And when we have access to the data, we list what types of batteries are used and who the developer is on the battery storage side. So hopefully that'd be helpful for you. Question for Rob. We already talked about how much money we have left in the TA fund, but people want to know, how long will the fund be open, and is it an open invitation, or is it invite only?
It's an open invitation. So, but it's, there's limited funds. So right now we're responding as we can to near-term requests for technical services. We expect that there'll be additional funding identified later in 2016, but right now we're sort of managing limited funds for this. And but to answer the question, really, is we're very much interested in knowing who is considering these projects, and we'll try to find resources to help with that, and we'll certainly provide our own time to help somebody think through a project.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm going to stay on for one more, because this is a question that I've looked at myself. There's a person that likes storage like we do, but has some concerns over what happens to a battery at the end of life if they just end up in a landfill. and that can't seem to be very good for the environment. And it's a very good point. That is something that's currently being explored by battery manufacturers. That's the last thing we want, is to end up with a lot of battery waste just sitting out there not doing anything. There is currently a movement going on. Batteries that are used originally for cars, for electric cars, there's a second life opportunity. They can be used for stationary storage applications like we're talking about here. So those do have a second life application. There are a number of manufacturers that are also looking into ways to make the batteries more reusable so that you can take components apart, easily recycle some of the materials, and then be able to reuse a lot of the components that don't get used up in the process of operating the battery. But that is something that's still being worked out. So I'm going to have to jump off. Thanks for everybody who joined us, and I'll leave it to Todd and Rob.
Okay, thanks very much, Seth. This is Todd, and I have the questions, so we can continue to address a few more of these and stretch this out a few more minutes so that we can get to more of your questions. Rob, I assume that you're good for a few minutes. And,
you bet, sure.
Okay, great. So somebody wants to know, do you have a page that details equipment used in installations with battery backup for commercial properties? We have a sort of a Solar and Storage 101 report on our website that you can find through our library, and that gives you a very good basic information about what's needed. What do you need? You need an inverter, you need islanding switching equipment, you need batteries, and you need PV, and you need where do you put everything, what goes behind the meter, and so forth. And so I really recommend that particular report. Also our frequently asked questions. And Samantha, maybe you could put up show the library link. Thank you, to our publications page. And so, we didn't scroll through these, but there are a lot of publications and many that deal with basic information on resilient power. Okay, Rob, I don't know, somebody wants to know how much funding is available to help affordable housing owners determine project feasibility. I feel like we sort of addressed that, but how long will this fund be open? Do we have a timeline for this? Is it open application? Could you address that a bit more?
It is open application. I think we have funding presently for maybe 3 or 4 more projects, depending on what they are. So again, I would just encourage people to follow up with us and have a phone conversation. And the application process is quite simple. It's a letter application. So that is all on the website, and I'd be glad to talk to people who have projects that are available, that they're interested in pursuing in the near term.
Great. So they would contact you directly, or
yes, yep.
or
Yep.
Seth. Okay, great. So here's somebody is asking whether storage would be for resiliency would be local in the facility or in a sort of per block or community, more rather than in an individual building. Would it be placed somewhere in the community to serve a larger area? And certainly could be done either way. I know that a lot of our focus has been on individual facilities, but there are of course microgrids, but there are also examples of neighborhood scale storage where you have a block of storage that is shared among a number of facilities. And we have a project that we're working on right now that that may end up looking like that, where instead of having a small battery in each of a number of facilities, you might have one larger one in the neighborhood that is wired up to all of the facilities to share. Rob, do you have any? Do we have any other information about that model that you know of?
Usually the buildings are contiguous if the storage is being used for multiple buildings. There's a project in Newark right now where two elderly housing projects are close enough that they can share some storage capacity. But you know, these are small microgrids where the buildings are contiguous or nearby.
Okay, great. And one other question from somebody on siting, and this one is about where you put batteries to avoid potentially being flooded in a disaster. Do you put them on rooftops? Do you put them in ancillary buildings? So in the case of, for example, multifamily housing, Rob, is this something that you've encountered?
It's wherever the electrical room tends to be. Is a natural place to place the storage, the battery. It's usually mounted on the wall, off the floor. For larger installations, these are quite large installations. They can occupy a container size structure, which is up on up off the ground. Outside the building, but adjacent to the building. So these are sited with flooding in mind. They're not put on the roof normally.
Okay, great. Somebody wants to know where they can find more information on Boston projects with DOER and also on the state's energy storage roadmap being written. You can simply go to a web browser search engine and search for Massachusetts Community Clean Energy Resilience Initiative. That will take you to the DOER program page. You can also search for Massachusetts Energy Storage Initiative, and that will take you to the information on the roadmap study that's being produced. And that study should be there should be results out from that study sometime at the end of the first quarter of this year. So sometime in March, we're expecting that to come out. Okay, I'll do another one or two questions, and I think we need to wrap it up. Here's a question. Do you envision that these assets would be owned and managed by utilities or communities and building owners? Yes. There are a number of different ownership models, and I can mention that in some cases we've seen, well, for example, here in Vermont, Green Mountain Power has two different models for that they're using for placing batteries behind the meter at customer sites. Either the customer owns the battery and essentially sells services to the utility, or the utility owns it and essentially sells services to the customer. And it can work either way. It sort of depends on, you know, who wants to make the upfront investment and what your use of the battery is going to be. I like the model where the customer owns it because I think the customer can get more benefit, but again, it depends on the economics and how it pencils out. And Rob, you probably want to jump in on this as well because there may be other considerations for ownership models that you've run into.
Yeah, I mean, most of what we see is either owner that the building owner directly buys the system. And has some sort of service agreement for the maintenance and operation of it, or it's third-party owned, and sometimes the third-party ownership is structured in a way, depending on the economics for the investor owner who owns the system and makes it available to the host. Sometimes they'll actually pay a lease payment directly to the host in order to take advantage of the revenue streams available from the battery storage. The other times you'll see that if the host provides some of the investment or capital that the third-party owner is using, so that the host becomes an investor too, or provides some of the financing, then there's a sharing of the upside or the revenue streams that are available from the battery storage. That can be negotiated. So there are many different models, but we're seeing building owners take lead in the ownership of the solar storage systems.
Great, thanks. And one more that I'm going to throw to you. This person says they found it very interesting about the bond finance. Is it possible to expand on that, and how does it work for schools, for example?
Well, it really is a matter of getting the solar plus storage design work, or getting the priority for that project into the capital budget process. So it's a decision about adding that feature, that capital budget item, into the projects that are going to be funded through a bond issuance. That would be the same requirement or political process or set of prioritization that would need to be done if it were a general obligation bond or a housing bond or a 501c3 bond. So it's really a matter of somebody wanting to prioritize that and figure out how to include it with other needs under the issuance. Or ultimately, I think you're going to see that city agencies, city officials are going to want to deploy solar plus storage, resilient energy across a portfolio of properties, of publicly owned assets. And a bond issuance will be a very efficient way to do that.
Okay, thanks very much. I think we're going to have to call it a webinar. We do have more questions, but I don't want to push this any longer. However, if your question wasn't addressed, you can contact us directly. You could see on the screen right now our email addresses for Seth, Rob, and myself, and feel free to send us an email with your question. Also, I encourage you to go to our website, look at our resource library, and use the search feature. Just type in your keyword, and for example, the bond finance that Rob was just talking about, we have at least one, I think maybe a couple of reports on that. So those are resources that are free and available for download by anybody, as are our webinar archives. So make use of our website. That's the whole point of doing this webinar. Okay, thanks everybody for attending. Samantha, do you want to talk a little bit about upcoming webinars that we have? Because I know we have a record-breaking number for this next month.
We do, yeah. We're trying to keep everyone busy in February and March, I think. We have quite a few webinars scheduled related to resilient power and energy storage. A few of them are listed on your screen. We have a few next week, some the week after. We've got a good roster. So if you go to our website, you can go to either resilient-power.org or cleanegroup.org/webinars to find more information about all of those webinars. They're all free and open to the public, and we hope you can attend some of those webinars. And thank you very much, everyone, for attending today.